Discernment isn't about forcing yourself to believe the most positive story. There's nothing I dislike more than toxic positivity, where we pretend like everything's fine when it's not. It's about becoming flexible enough to consider that your first interpretation may not be the only one. Curiosity expands possibility. Our brains are incredibly fast. Something happens, and almost instantly, our mind creates meaning, a story or an explanation of some kind. And because it happens so quickly, the conclusions we come to often feel like the only possible explanation. But what if it isn't? I think one question has changed my life more than any other, and that is, what else could be true? That's it. It's simple, it's gentle, it's curious. It's not asking you to ignore your first interpretation. It's asking you to make room for more than one. And that changes how you experience your inner world and the narratives going on in your head, the assumptions you're making about what you're experiencing every day. I grew up in a system that taught me that their version of reality was the only true version of reality. And therefore, I grew up believing that the world was very black and white. I saw things as true or false all the time. And I was taught to interpret my own reality through the lens of what they defined as acceptable reality. The question, what else could be true, was what led me out of that system. The capacity that I developed to look at the things that did not feel right, to sit in the uncertainty that perhaps what I'd been taught my entire life and formulated my entire identity on might not be true, was so threatening and created so much uncertainty within me. But above anything else I value in this life of mine, it is truth, reality, seeing in clarity, and changing when we realize that what we're doing isn't working. So the question that I sat with as I felt so out of alignment with myself remaining in this system, what else could be true, was ultimately what blew down the house of cards that was keeping me in that system. So this is really near and dear to my heart, this idea of maintaining an openness to being wrong and to adjusting when you realize that the way you're seeing something may not be the only way. Let's go back to our example with the text message, right? You sent a message, hours pass, no response, and your mind says, they're mad at me, they're never talking to me again, I can't believe this, what did I do wrong? How dare they be upset with me? And now you're mad because you think they're mad, and it spirals all over the place. Maybe that's true. Maybe they're mad. Maybe you did make a funny face and they never want to see you again. I mean, I would say I don't really want a friend like that who will be that mad at me just for like punctuating weird or making a weird face. But, that's besides the point. What else could be true? Maybe they're in a meeting or their phone died. Maybe they read it and forgot to reply, because they're busy and they have a life. Maybe they're taking a break from their phone. Maybe they're caring for a sick child. Maybe they haven't seen it yet. Notice, I'm not saying your first interpretation is impossible. I'm just saying it's not the only possibility. And that's a really important difference. Flexible thinking is so important to develop. Flexibility is one of the greatest signs of emotional health. Not because emotionally healthy people never have strong reactions. They do. But they remain open to learning. Rigid thinking says, I already know. Flexible thinking says, I wonder. Rigid thinking closes the conversation and curiosity keeps it open. One of my favorite things to remind myself of is the people who matter the most to me will be curious before they're certain. And I use that as a light post of sorts in how I choose the people that remain closest to me. When we can remain curious, it tends to calm that certainty down and relax the uncertainty that we're trying desperately to replace with certainty. Our nervous system often wants certainty, even if it's painful certainty, even if it's something we don't want to believe, but we believe it anyway because it takes away the uncertainty of the moment. Because now we have predictability, which feels so much safer. But discernment asks us to consider something different. Can I tolerate not knowing just a little longer? It's hard. It takes courage to sit there and stay there, not rushing to conclusions, not because you're passive or you don't care anymore, but because you're willing to gather more information and regulate yourself in the meantime before deciding. That entirely changes the way we respond to the things that are going on around us. Curiosity also creates far better relationships. Imagine someone says something that hurt your feelings, and your first narrative might be, they don't respect me. Maybe. But what else could be true? Maybe they were distracted. Maybe they misunderstood. Maybe they're carrying something heavy today. Maybe they chose poor words. Maybe your first interpretation is correct. The point isn't to excuse people. The point is to understand them accurately. That is discernment. And that protects us from a lot of unnecessary second arrows. Curiosity really is strength. Sometimes it gets mistaken for weakness. People think, if I don't immediately decide what happened, I'm being naive. I might get hurt or taken advantage of. And I don't think that's true. Curiosity actually takes quite a lot of courage. It requires enough internal safety to say, I don't know enough yet. And that can be really difficult for some people to admit. Some people have built an entire life off of feeling like they know what's going on, having that sense of predictability and strength and feeling like, I've got this. I know, I've seen this before, I've been to this rodeo, I know what's going on, and I'm not doing this again, or I know how to handle this. If you can sit in the uncertainty and remain curious, takes courage, and it's a strong place to stand and build your life from. That's the kind of strength that we're building. That strength comes from widening your window, widening that space between stimulus and response, that space of conscious awareness. If you remember one thing today, the first story your mind tells isn't always the whole story. You don't have to reject it. You don't have to accept it. You can become curious. And sometimes the simple question, what else could be true, creates enough space for wisdom to enter. And that's what discernment looks like.